The dirt was cold. It was a wet, heavy cold that clung to the shovel and spattered Clara's skirt with thick, yellow mud. The rain fell in sheets, driven by a wind that clawed at the mountains and screamed down into the valley. It was a bad day to be alive, and a worse day to be burying your father. Clara drove the spade into the hard-pan clay. Her arms ached, and her hands were raw inside her father's soaked leather gloves. She was alone. She had wrapped Silas Croft in the canvas tarp he used to cover the wagon, tied it with rope, and dragged him herself to this spot just beyond the wilting vegetable patch. There was no coffin. There was no preacher. There was just the sound of the metal cutting the earth and her own ragged breathing. 1886, and Montana felt like the edge of the world. She stopped, leaning on the handle, and pushed the wet hair from her face. She looked back at the ranch house. It was a squat, miserable structure of graying timber, the chimney spilling weak smoke that the wind immediately tore apart. Through the two small, dirty windows, she could see them, watching her. The 10. "You all left me nothing," she sobbed, the words stolen by the gale. "Nothing." Silas hadn't just left her nothing. He had left her debt that stacked higher than the chimney. He left her 160 acres of drought-stricken rock, a collapsed barn, and 2 bony horses she couldn't afford to feed. And he left her the 10 women, his collection, his strays, his burden. When the hole was finally deep enough, or deep enough that she couldn't bear to dig anymore, she rolled the canvas bundle into the ground. It landed with a soft, final thud. She didn't say a prayer. She just started shoveling the mud back in, her movements angry and desperate. By the time she was done, she was covered in the grave, and the sky was a deep, bruised purple. She walked back to the house, the mud sucking at her boots. She pushed the door open, and the smell hit her. It was the smell of unwashed bodies, stale cornmeal, damp wool, and a thick, suffocating fear. They were all there, huddled around the small stone hearth where a few pieces of damp cottonwood sputtered. 10 faces turned to her, pale and anxious in the gloom. Elspeth was the oldest, maybe 50. She had been an abandoned wife, found by Silas in Miles City, waiting for a husband who had gone west and never sent word. Silas offered her a place as housekeeper. She was gaunt, her hands knotted with arthritis, but she kept cleaning, endlessly wiping the same layer of dust off the broken furniture. She looked at Clara with a pity that felt like an insult. Sadie was younger, maybe 25, with a cough that rattled her thin chest and eyes that had seen too much. She'd come from a saloon in Cheyenne. Silas had bought her. He'd claimed, for $50 and a promise of marriage that evaporated as soon as they reached the ranch. She was pretty once, maybe, but the life had worn her down to sharp edges and nervous hands that constantly twisted the fabric of her skirt. Then there were the sisters, Mary Beth and Alice, barely 16 and 17. They were running from a stepfather in the Dakota Territories, a man whose kindness ended when his jug was full. They'd worked for Silas for 6 months, mending fences for land that produced nothing. In exchange for food, they mostly had to find themselves. They sat holding hands, their eyes wide and terrified, like 2 spooked deer. Josephine was quiet, broad-shouldered, and strong, but her face was a map of old bruises. She never spoke of the husband she'd fled, but she flinched if a man moved too quickly. Silas had found her on the road, walking toward the mountains with nothing but the clothes on her back, and offered her shelter for work. Hattie and May were widows. Hattie's husband had been taken by the railroad, not killed, but broken by the work, and she'd lost her small farm. May's husband died of cholera on the trail, and she'd been left with his debts. Ruth was twitchy, always looking over her shoulder. Clara suspected Ruth was running from the law. Not a man. She was quick with her hands. And Clara had seen her pocket a small knife from the kitchen, but she'd said nothing. Abigail was the newest, a mail-order bride whose intended had died of a fever the week before she arrived. Silas, in a fit of what he called charity, had told her she could stay on. And finally, there was Lena. Lena was the ghost. She was pale, with fine, blonde hair, and eyes that never seemed to focus. She'd been dropped off 2 weeks ago by a man in a fine buggy who didn't even get down. He'd just handed Silas a small purse of coins and said, "She's your problem now." Lena never spoke above a whisper and woke up screaming most nights. 10 women, 10 mouths, 10 histories of pain and loss. Not one of them had anywhere else to go. The world outside this valley had already broken them. This ranch, this failed patch of dirt, was the last stop. Clara stripped off her father's gloves and threw them on the floor. "He's buried," she stated. Sadie started to cry, a high, thin sound. "What are we going to do, Clara? What's going to happen to us?" "We survive," Clara said, her voice hard. She was 17, but she felt ancient. She pushed past them into the lean-to kitchen. The reality of their situation was stark. The ranch was dead. The creek was running low even after the rain. The pasture was brown stubble. The main barn had collapsed on one side during a windstorm 2 winters back, and Silas had just left it. The cowshed was standing, but their one milking cow had gone dry a month ago. Clara looked at the stores. It didn't take long. 2 sacks of flour, the bottoms of both crawling with weevils, a barrel of salt pork, maybe a quarter full, a few dozen jars of beans Elspeth had put up, a half-empty sack of potatoes, already sprouting. That was it. That was meant to get 11 women through a Montana winter. "Elspeth," Clara called, her voice shaking despite her efforts. "We need to ration 2 meals a day. Sadie, you and Hattie see to the animals. The horses need water, and we eat the chickens. Tonight." "But the eggs," Alice whispered from the doorway. "They haven't laid in a week," Clara snapped. "They're just eating grain we don't have. We eat them, Mary Beth, you and Josephine. Take the axe to the fallen wood behind the barn. We need firewood, stacks of it." The women scattered, relieved to have orders, even impossible ones. Clara sank onto a stool, dropping her head into her hands. She tried to be the leader. She tried to use the voice her father had used, loud, confident, full of bluster that promised everything would be fine. But it felt like ash in her mouth. She was haunted, not by her father's ghost, but by his death. It had been sudden, just 4 days ago. His heart, Elspeth claimed. He had grabbed his chest, his eyes wide, and stumbled against the table. He had looked right at Clara, his face pale with shock, and in that last moment, she saw no love. She saw no fear. She saw only a vast, terrible blame. "You should have been a son. You should have been stronger. You let this happen." He had spent his life chasing a fortune he never earned, collecting women he couldn't care for, and in his dying breath, he had passed the weight of his failure onto her shoulders. She hated him for it, and she wept, silently, because she was so utterly alone. He arrived 3 days after the burial. The storm had passed, leaving the world scoured and quiet. The sky was a low, bruised purple, and the air had a new bite. Winter wasn't just coming. It was here. A rider. Sadie saw him first. She was shaking out a blanket on the porch and let out a small gasp, dropping it in the mud. "Clara, someone's coming." Clara shielded her eyes. He was a dark shape against the pale horizon, moving steadily. He wasn't from around here. He sat tall on a big roan horse, not a depleted ranch pony like theirs. He wore a long duster, dark with travel, and a hat pulled low. He didn't ride up shouting a greeting. He just stopped at the broken fence line, 100 yards out, and watched the house. For a full minute, he just sat there, surveying the ruin, the collapsed barn, the meager curl of smoke, the women frozen on the porch. Clara wiped her hands on her trousers. She hadn't worn a dress since her father took ill. She walked out onto the packed dirt of the yard, her heart a cold knot in her stomach. "Debt collectors," she thought. "Mr. Davies from the bank, coming to take the land." The man finally nudged his horse forward, walking it slow. He moved with a coiled stillness, like a wolf testing the air. As he drew closer, she saw the weariness in him. He was maybe 30, his face all angles and shadow, covered in dark stubble. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a flat, cold gray, and they missed nothing. He stopped 10 feet from her. His horse was a fine animal, strong and well-fed, a stark contrast to their own skeletal creatures. "Can I help you, mister?" Clara called out. Her voice sounded thin. He dismounted, slow and deliberate. Every motion seemed measured. He swept the duster back, and she saw the pistol belted at his hip. He took off his heavy glove, stuffing it into his belt. "I'm looking for Silas Croft," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stones dragging over sand. "He's dead," Clara said flatly. "Buried 3 days. Who are you?" The man didn't look surprised. He didn't offer condolences. He just looked inconvenienced. He tipped his head back slightly, his gray eyes assessing her, from her muddy boots to her tangled hair. "My name is Eli Sampson," he said. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, tied with a leather string. "And these papers say this land, this house, and that pile of lumber you call a barn belong to my family." Clara's blood went cold. "That's a lie. This was my father's homestead. He filed the claim." "Your father," Eli said, his voice dropping, "was a card cheat. He won the deed to this spread, the original Sampson homestead, from my uncle in a rigged game of faro 10 years ago, in Virginia City." He stepped closer, and she could smell the road on him. Leather, sweat, and cold air. "My uncle drank himself to death over it. I'm here to take it back." The front door creaked open, and the other women peered out, their faces white, 10 pairs of eyes, wide with a new kind of terror. "You can't," Clara said, desperation making her bold. We have nowhere to go. There are 11 of us here." Eli Sampson looked past her, his gaze sweeping over the women huddled in the doorway. He saw the thin faces, the patched dresses, the hopeless quiet. His expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "That's not my concern." "Miss," he said, "the deed your father held is fraudulent. I have affidavits from 2 men who saw the game. I have the original surveyor's map. Your father built his failures on my family's ruin. Now I'm taking it back." "Get off this land," Clara hissed. She turned and grabbed the broom leaning against the porch rail, holding it across her chest like a rifle. It was a pathetic defense, and she knew it. Eli almost smiled. It wasn't a kind expression. It was brittle and cold. "I'm not leaving. This is my property." "We'll starve," Sadie cried from the doorway, stepping out onto the porch. "Mister, please, you can see what's here. There's nothing. Winter's here. You can't put us out." Eli looked at Sadie, his gaze lingering on her hollow cheeks and the tremor in her hands. For the briefest of moments, a flicker of something, uncertainty, perhaps, crossed his face, but it was gone as fast as it came. "I'm not a monster, ma'am," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not throwing women out into the cold today, but I am staying, come morning. I ride to Miles City and fetch the marshal and Judge Davies. They know my claim. This will be settled proper." Clara's heart hammered. Judge Davies, the same man who held the note on the land. They were finished, caught between the bank and this ghost. "You're not staying in this house," Clara said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and powerlessness. "Didn't plan on it," Eli replied. He jerked his chin toward the run-down cowshed. "That'll do. It's on my land." He turned without another word, took his horse's reins, and led the animal toward the shed. The women retreated inside, the silence heavier and colder than before. They watched him through the window. He moved with a lean efficiency, pulling his bedroll and a small sack of supplies from his horse. He forced the warped door of the shed open, brushed aside old, dry manure with his boot, and tethered his horse in the empty stall. He was a threat, a looming disaster, but he was also capable. He didn't waste a single motion. He checked the shed's leaky roof, then sat on his bedroll, pulled a piece of hardtack from his bag, and began to eat, his back against the wall, facing the house, waiting.
"What do we do?"
Alice whispered, tears tracking through the grime on her face.
"We wait,"
Clara said, her stomach twisting.
"He has to go to town. We just wait."
Night fell. The temperature plummeted. The wind picked up again. Not a gale this time, but a high, thin whistle that promised ice. They ate their meager supper of thin rabbit stew. Josephine had managed to snare one, in absolute silence. Every woman was aware of the man sitting in their cowshed, just 50 yards away. Clara imagined him sitting in the dark, his cold gray eyes staring at their house, waiting to evict them all into oblivion. The snow started around 3 in the morning. It didn't start gently. It came on like an explosion, a wall of white, driven by a wind that shifted direction and howled like a mourning woman. Clara was jerked awake by the sudden, violent rattling of the window panes. The house itself seemed to groan under the assault. A draft of icy air hit her face. She stumbled from her cot, pushing past the sleeping forms of Sadie and Lena. She went to the window and wiped the frost from the pane. She couldn't see the cowshed. She couldn't see the fence line. She couldn't see her own hand in front of the glass. There was only a churning, blinding, deafening vortex of white. The blizzard raged all night. It raged all through the next day. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin. The wind was so loud they had to shout to be heard. They piled their blankets together, huddling near the hearth, feeding the fire stick by stick. The snow piled up against the door, sealing them in. On the second morning, the wind finally died. A terrible, frozen silence fell over the land. The world was muffled, dead. Clara and Elspeth put their shoulders to the front door. It wouldn't budge. "It's drifted," Elspeth said, her voice grim. They used the fireplace poker to break the ice seal and, together, forced the door open just enough to see. The drift was 5 feet high, packed against the house. The landscape was gone. It was a sterile, white desert under a sharp, painfully blue sky. "The horses," Clara breathed, her lungs aching from the sudden cold. "And him," Elspeth said quietly. They looked toward where the cowshed should be. It was almost completely buried. Only a few feet of the roofline was visible. A dark slash in the endless white. There was no smoke. There was no movement. "My God," Sadie whispered from behind them.
"It's buried him. He's dead."
Clara stared. A part of her felt a cold flicker of relief. The problem was solved. The claim was gone. But another part of her, a deeper, more human part, was horrified. She grabbed the shovel, the one she had used to bury her father.
"Hattie, Josephine, help me!"
She plunged into the drift, the snow up to her waist. It was light powder on top, but packed hard as ice beneath. They dug a trench, the 3 of them, panting in the thin, frozen air. It took them nearly 30 minutes to reach the cowshed door.
"Mr. Sampson!"
Clara yelled, her voice raw. No answer.
"He's dead,"
Hattie panted, leaning on her own shovel. "We don't know that." Clara grabbed the wooden latch. It was frozen solid. She beat it with the flat of the shovel until the ice cracked. She and Josephine put their shoulders to the door, pushing against the weight of the snow that had packed against it. It gave way with a crack, spilling them into the frozen darkness inside. He was in the corner. His horse, coated in frost, stood over him, shivering violently. Eli was wrapped in his bedroll and his horse blanket, but he was half covered in snow that had blasted through the cracks in the walls. He was alive, but just barely. His face was a waxy, pale gray. His lips were blue. He looked up as they stumbled in, his cold eyes clouded and slow. "Figured you'd take your time," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper.
"Get him!"
Elspeth ordered, pushing past Clara. They half carried, half dragged him from the shed. He was a dead weight, his legs barely working. They hauled him through the trench they dug and back to the main house. The 10 women parted as they brought him in, their faces a complex mask of fear, resentment, and pity. They laid him on the floor by the hearth, the closest thing to warmth they had. The blizzard had done what Clara's broom and her father's debts could not. It had broken the standoff. The snow had blocked every pass, every road. Miles City was 50 miles away. It might as well have been 1,000. Eli Sampson, the man who had come to take everything, wasn't going anywhere. And neither, for now, were they. He was trapped with 10 desperate women, and the one woman who hated him enough to let him freeze, but hadn't. The world outside the cabin was a tomb of white. For 3 days, the wind howled. On the 4th, it stopped. The silence that fell was heavy and absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rattling cough from Sadie's chest. They were 11 souls trapped in a box, and the cold was a living thing trying to get in. Eli recovered quickly. The near freezing had taken the fight out of him, but not the strength. After a day spent by the hearth, wrapped in blankets, the color returned to his face, and the cold gray of his eyes became sharp again. He watched them. He watched the dwindling wood pile. He watched Clara portioning out the weevil flower. He didn't ask permission. On the 2nd day, he stood up, his joints stiff, and pulled his boots on. He took the axe from beside the door.
What do you think you're doing?
Clara challenged him, stepping in his path. Saving your life, miss, which seems to be a habit, he said, his voice still rough. He pushed past her, forced the snow-packed door open, and waded out into the chest-high drift. They watched from the window. He moved to the collapsed barn, his back a rigid line against the glare of the snow. For hours, there was only the sound of the axe. Thunk, thunk, thunk. He was splitting the thick beams of the ruined structure, salvaging the dry heartwood. He hauled it back in loads, stacking it near the hearth, not speaking, his face grim. They had eaten the last of the chickens on the first night of the blizzard. Now, there was only salt pork and the thin cornmeal mush Elspeth made. The hunger was a constant, dull ache. The house itself was failing. The wind had found a gap in the roof near the chimney, and a steady, fine powder of snow sifted down into the main room. "It's going to collapse the roof," Elspeth fretted, her hands twisting. Before Clara could form a plan, Eli was moving. He grabbed a hammer and some loose boards from the lean-to. "I need rope," he said. Josephine, the quiet one, produced a length of it. He tied it around his waist, handing the other end to her. "Don't let me fall," he ordered. He climbed onto the table, shouldered his way through the attic hatch, and disappeared. They heard him on the roof, the heavy thud of his boots, the sound of the hammer against the frozen shingles. He worked for an hour in the biting, sub-zero air. When he came back down, his face was rimmed with ice, his beard frozen solid, but the snow had stopped falling. He was indispensable, and it made Clara hate him more. Later that afternoon, May, one of the widows, went out to the well with a bucket. She was gone too long. Clara was pulling on her boots when the door burst open, and Eli stumbled in, carrying May in his arms. Her face was blue, her shawl left behind. She had slipped on the ice and collapsed, the cold overwhelming her in seconds. Eli laid her by the fire and began rubbing her hands and feet, his movements rough but efficient. "Get blankets, warm water, not hot," he commanded. The women flew to obey. Clara watched, frozen, as he brought the older woman back from the edge. He had saved one of them. He, the man who had come to take their home, had just saved a life. They began to accept him, not with words, but with small gestures. Elspeth offered him the first bowl of stew. Mary Beth mended the tear in his duster. They gave him the small space by the fire, their bodies unconsciously turning to him. This solid, capable male presence in their house of fear. All of them, except Clara. The truce was only with the cold. Between her and Eli, the war smoldered. "You have no right to that wood," she snapped at him one evening, as he fed another beam fragment into the fire. "That's part of this house. My father built that barn." Eli looked up from the floor, his face shadowed by the firelight. "Your father built nothing. He stole this. He sat on stolen land for 10 years and let it rot. This wood was cut by my uncle. I'm just taking back the timber." "You're a vulture," she said, her voice low and shaking. "You came here to pick over the bones. You were just waiting for him to die so you could throw us out." "I came here for justice," he countered, standing up. He was tall, and he seemed to suck the air from the room. "And I find you, living off the scraps of his dirty money. You eat food bought with a lie. You sleep under a roof paid for by a cheat. Don't you dare talk to me about rights." "We are surviving." "You're squatting," he hissed, "just like him." The other women fell silent, their eyes darting between the two of them. Clara wanted to hit him. She wanted to scream. Instead, she turned, grabbed her coat, and went outside, slamming the door so hard the icicles on the eaves shattered. The air in the cabin grew thick. It was too small for 11 people. The nights were the worst. They all slept in the main room, a tangle of blankets and cots spread near the hearth. The darkness was filled with the sounds of coughing, of quiet weeping, of nightmares. One night, Clara was jolted awake by a scream. It was Lena, the pale, silent girl. She was sitting bolt upright on her cot, her eyes wide and blind with terror, fighting something that wasn't there. "Hush, child, hush," Elspeth murmured, trying to calm her. But Lena thrashed, scrambling away, and fell off her cot, landing near Eli's bedroll. Before he was even fully awake, she had lunged, wrapping her arms around his chest, burying her face in his shirt, her body convulsing with sobs. "Don't let him," she gasped. "Please, please, don't let him take me back." The room was frozen. Eli was stiff, his hands raised, not touching her. He looked deeply uncomfortable. He finally, gently, put his hands on her shoulders. "You're safe, ma'am," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "It was a dream. You're safe here." He carefully unwrapped her arms and pushed her back toward Elspeth. "See to her," he said. He turned his back on the room, pulling the blanket over his shoulder, ending the scene. But the desperation had been laid bare. It clung to the air like smoke. Sadie, the saloon girl, saw it differently. She saw a protector. She saw a strong man, the only man. She saw an escape route. Clara saw her do it. It was 2 days later, in the narrow lean-to kitchen. Eli was checking his saddle, the leather stiff from the cold. Sadie cornered him, her body blocking the exit. She put her hand on his arm. "It must be hard," Sadie whispered, her voice low and practiced. "Being trapped here, with all of us. No comfort." Eli stopped working. He didn't look at her hand. "We're all trapped, Sadie." "A man like you," she continued, her fingers tracing a line down his forearm. "You have needs. This house is cold. I can be warm. I know how to be warm for a man who can offer safety." Clara held her breath, watching from the doorway. She felt a surge of disgust, aimed at both of them. Eli very deliberately set his saddle down. He took Sadie's hand from his arm, holding it gently but firmly. "I appreciate the offer, ma'am," he said, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. "But I'm not looking for that kind of warmth, and I'm not the safety you're looking for. Don't offer yourself cheap, not even to me." He released her hand. Sadie's face crumpled, a flush of shame and anger rising on her pale cheeks. She hurried past him, refusing to look at Clara. Eli met Clara's gaze across the room. His eyes were cold, unreadable. He had refused Sadie. He had been decent, even, but Clara felt no relief, She just felt the complex, suffocating tension ratchet tighter. He had refused them, but his gaze began to change when he looked at her. He watched her. He watched her when she stood over the hearth, the stew pot steaming, her face flushed and damp from the heat. He watched her hands, raw and chapped, as she restitched a tear in Josephine's boot. He watched her as she argued with Hattie over the last of the potatoes, her voice sharp and brittle, but her eyes full of a terrible exhaustion. One afternoon, he was splitting the last of the barnwood. The axe was old, the head loose, on a downswing. The metal head glanced off a knot, and a shard of steel flew off, slicing open the back of his left hand. He cursed, low and vicious, dropping the axe. Clara was on the porch. She saw the blood, dark red against the white snow. She hesitated for only a second. Then she went inside, tore a strip from one of her father's old shirts, and grabbed the whiskey bottle they kept for medicine. She went to him. "Give it to me," she said. He held out his hand. The cut was clean, but deep, welling blood. She uncorked the whiskey with her teeth and poured it directly into the wound. He hissed, his body tensing, but he didn't pull away. She bound the cloth around his hand, her fingers working quickly. Her touch was not gentle, it was practical, angry. "You're careless," she said. "It's a dull axe," he replied, his voice strained. Their faces were inches apart. She was tying the knot, pulling it tight. He was looking at her mouth. She was looking at the cut. "There," she said, pulling back. "Try not to bleed on the floor." She walked back to the house, but she felt the burn of his eyes on her back until the door closed. The breaking point came a week after the blizzard. The snow had settled, packed hard by the wind, but the passes were still closed. The food was almost gone. The cabin felt like a powder keg. They had run out of the barnwood. All that was left was her father's desk, a heavy oak thing he'd hauled all the way from St. Louis. "We burn it," Eli said. "No," Clara said, standing in front of it. It was the only fine thing in the house. "It's either that or we freeze tonight," he said. "Your choice."
You want it gone, don't you?
She accused him, her voice trembling.
You want every trace of him gone. This is where he kept his papers. This is where he worked.
"This is where he kept his ledgers of stolen goods," Eli said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is where he celebrated cheating my family out of their future. It's just wood,
Clara,
and we need the heat. You don't know him. You know nothing but your own thirst for revenge. He took us in. He took all of us in when no one else would. He took you in to work his stolen land. He collected you like stray animals to feed his own pride. He was a liar, and he made you a liar, living here with him."
Get out,
she whispered, shaking.
Get out of this house.
"I can't," he said, stepping closer. "And neither can you. We're stuck, you and me, in this house built on a crime. You, his daughter, and me, the man he wronged, and 10 ghosts watching us."
I hate you,
she sobbed, the words tearing out of her. "You come here with your righteous anger and your papers. You think you're better than him. You're not. You're just a man with a gun, taking what you want." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" he asked, his voice dropping. He was close now. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the faint scents of wood smoke, sweat, and cold iron.
I know what you are,
she spat. She raised her hand to slap him. He caught her wrist. His grip was steel. His gray eyes were no longer cold. They were burning. The house was silent. The other women were watching, holding their breath. "Not here," he growled. He jerked his head toward the door. He dragged her by the wrist, out of the house, out onto the porch, and into the blinding, frozen afternoon. He didn't stop. He hauled her through the snow track, toward the cowshed.
Let go of me,
she screamed, struggling, slipping on the ice. He kicked the shed door open. It was dark inside, and colder than the air, smelling of hay and frozen manure. His horse whickered in the stall. He threw her inside. She stumbled and fell against the wall. He came in after her, kicking the door shut, plunging them into near darkness.
"You want to fight, Clara?"
He panted, advancing on her. "You want to talk about justice? Let's talk." "You're a bully," she cried, scrambling to her feet, her back against the rough timber. "You're just a bully, come to hurt women." "I came for my land," he roared, slamming his good hand against the wall next to her head. The whole shed shook. "I came for what was mine, and I find this tragedy. Your father's last, greatest mistake." The words struck her harder than a slap. All the fear, all the grief for her father, all the crushing weight of the 10 women, all the hunger and the cold. It shattered. She lunged at him, beating his chest with her fists. "You bastard! You left us nothing! He left us nothing! I have nothing!" He grabbed her, not just her wrists, but all of her. He crushed her against him, lifting her off her feet, his arms locking around her back. She was trapped, her face pressed against his cold duster. She stopped fighting. She just hung there, limp, and a dry, ragged sob broke from her. "I know," he said, his voice a raw whisper against her hair. His grip loosened, but he didn't let go. He just held her. She was shaking, or maybe he was. The anger had burned out, leaving something else, something raw and aching. He lowered her until her boots touched the ground. His hands moved from her back, one coming up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her messy hair. She should have pulled away. She should have run, but she was so tired, and he was so warm. She looked up at him. His face was all harsh angles in the gloom, his eyes searching hers. The silence stretched. It was no longer a fight. It was a surrender. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was rough, punishing. It was the taste of whiskey and desperation. His mouth was hard on hers, taking, demanding. It was an explosion of all the tension, all the hate, all the unspoken need that had built between them in that tiny, suffocating house. She kissed him back. She clawed at his shoulders, pulling him closer. This was not love. It was madness. It was 2 people at the end of their rope, clinging to the only solid thing in a world of ice. His good hand fumbled with the buttons of her coat, tearing it open. His gloved hand moved to her waist, pulling her shirt free from her trousers. His skin was cold. Hers was hot. She gasped as his icy fingers touched her stomach. He pushed her back against the wall, his mouth moving from hers, down her throat. She arched her neck, her hands fumbling with the buckle of his belt. It was frantic, clumsy, a desperate scramble of limbs and layers in the freezing dark. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, her boots scraping the wall. He pressed her against the timber, his body flush against hers, and shoved himself inside her. It was a sharp, sudden pain, and then just a brutal friction. It was rough. It was fast. It was 2 animals seeking warmth, seeking oblivion. There were no soft words, only the harsh sound of their breathing, the scrape of her boots, the low grunt he gave as he spent himself inside her, his body shuddering against hers. He stayed there for a long moment, his face buried in her neck, his breath hot on her skin. She clung to him, her eyes shut tight, the tears freezing on her cheeks. Then, just as quickly, it was over. He let her slide down his body until she was standing again. He stepped back. He didn't look at her face. He just turned, straightened his clothes, and fastened his belt. Clara leaned against the wall, her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. She pulled her coat closed, her fingers numb and clumsy. The shame was so vast, so cold, it threatened to swallow her. He opened the door. The bright white light of the snow blinded her. "We still need the wood," he said, his voice flat, as if nothing had happened. He walked out of the shed. Clara waited until he was halfway to the house. Then she slid down the wall and sat on the frozen, manure-dusted floor, and cried in silence. The next morning, the cabin was a place of ghosts. Clara rose before dawn, her body aching, a deep, bruised soreness between her legs. She couldn't look at him. She busied herself at the hearth, her movements jerky and angry. Eli sat on his bedroll, cleaning his pistol, his face a mask of stone. He said nothing. He offered no apology, no explanation, no word of comfort. He just existed, a dark, silent presence by the fire. No one had seen, no one had heard, but the air had changed. The tension that had snapped between them was gone, replaced by a thick, heavy silence that suffocated the room. The other women felt it. They looked from Clara's pale, rigid face to Eli's quiet indifference, and they knew something was broken, or perhaps something terrible had been forged. The silence in the cabin had a new weight. It was thick and brittle, no longer just the quiet of trapped people, but the quiet of a secret. Clara moved like a ghost, her face pale and shut. She did her chores, her hands scrubbing the pots with a new, fierce energy, as if she could scour away the memory of the cowshed. Eli sat by the fire, his bandaged hand resting on his knee, his eyes on the flames. He and Clara did not speak. They did not look at each other. But the others looked. They watched the two of them, the man who had claimed their home and the girl who was supposed to lead them, and they felt the air shift. It was a change they could not name, but it vibrated with the tension of a pulled-tight wire. Lena felt it most. She was the ghost of the house, the pale girl with the straw-colored hair and the eyes that had seen too much. She drifted through the rooms, flinching from loud noises, her hands often pressed to her mouth as if to hold in a scream. In the weeks of being trapped, her gaze had found Eli. He was not like the men from her past. He was quiet, but he was not weak. He was hard, but he was not cruel. She had seen him save May. She had seen him reject Sadie, not with contempt, but with a strange, firm gentleness. She had seen him repair the roof. He was a protector. A fragile, desperate hope had begun to grow in her chest. She began to watch him with a silent, hungry devotion. She would make sure his cup had water. She would fold the blanket he'd used when he came in from the cold. They were small, invisible acts of worship. This new, cold silence between him and Clara was a puzzle. It was louder than their arguments had been. She felt a prickle of unease. The thaw had begun. The world was dripping. The snowpack, which had been 6 feet deep, was shrinking, revealing the thick, yellow mud beneath. The paths to the cowshed and the small grain shed were treacherous. Eli spent most of his time outside. Assessing the ranch he now considered his. He was checking the foundations of the cowshed, testing the rotted wood. Lena watched him from the window. Clara, driven by a restlessness she could not contain, pulled on her boots. They were almost out of flour. She had to check the seed grain to see if there was anything left they could grind. She walked to the small grain shed, a squat building near the dead vegetable patch. Eli was already there. He was standing inside, the door open, sifting a handful of the moldy seed wheat. "It's no good," he said, his back to her. "Most of it's rotted." Clara stopped in the doorway. "We can wash it. We can pick through it. It'll make us sick." He let the grain fall through his fingers and turned to face her. The shed was barely big enough for 2 people. His presence filled it. "Then we'll starve," she said, her voice flat. "It doesn't matter. You'll have your land." "Clara," he said, his voice low. He took a step toward her. "What happened? It was nothing." She cut him off, her eyes fixed on a crack in the wall. "It was the cold. It was madness. It's over." "Was it?" he asked. He was close enough now that she could feel the warmth from his body. He reached out, not to grab her, but just to touch her arm. She flinched, a violent, full-body tremor. His hand stopped, hovering in the air between them. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You did," she whispered, the truth tearing out of her.
You hurt me.
I know. His voice was full of a rough pain she hadn't heard before. I know, and I'm sorry for it. He didn't move. He just stood there. She looked up at him, her eyes finally meeting his. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the self-loathing. He wasn't the victor. He was just as trapped as she was. The anger in her chest didn't break. It just dissolved. She leaned forward, just an inch, and rested her forehead against his chest, against the rough wool of his duster. He let out a long, shuddering breath. His good hand, the one that wasn't bandaged, came up and rested gently on the back of her head. He didn't pull her. He didn't demand. He just held her, his fingers lightly stroking her tangled hair. God, Clara, he murmured. What did he do to us? She didn't answer. She just stood there, breathing in his scent, and for the first time since her father died. She didn't feel entirely alone. He tilted her chin up. He kissed her. It was not the brutal, angry kiss from the shed. It was soft, hesitant, a question, and she answered it, her lips parting, her hand coming up to rest on his chest. It was a kiss of shared sorrow. From 30 yards away, Lena saw it all. She had followed Eli, as she always did, just to be near him. She stood behind the corner of the main house, the melting ice dripping on her thin shawl. She saw Clara enter the shed. She saw them talking, and she saw Clara lean into him. She saw his hand, so strong, so gentle, touch her hair. She saw the kiss. It was not the violent coupling she might have imagined. It was worse. It was tender. It was the one thing she could not have. A small, strangled sound escaped her throat. She pressed her hands to her mouth and fled, stumbling through the mud back to the house, her world collapsing. The poison spread quickly. Lena, the silent ghost, found her voice. It was a voice sharpened by betrayal. She found Sadie in the kitchen, coughing into a rag. He's with her, Lena whispered, her face pale and streaked with tears. I saw them, in the grain shed, kissing, like lovers. Sadie's head snapped up, her face, already sallow, hardened. She's no better than us, acting like a queen. She's just a whore, same as me. She's worse, Lena said, her voice gaining strength. She's hoarding him. He's the only man here, the only one who can protect us, and she's keeping him for herself. What happens to us when he gets what he wants? He'll take her and leave. He'll leave us all here to die. The fear was a spark on dry tinder. They went to Hattie and May, the widows. She's sleeping with him, Sadie said, her voice full of righteous venom. Clara, while we're all wondering where the next meal is coming from, she's in the shed, securing her place. He's not here for the land. He's here for her. He saved me, May protested weakly. He saved you because he wanted the ranch, Lena countered, her eyes bright with fever. But now she's given him what he wants. We're just extra mouths. We're in her way. The house split. Elspeth tried to quiet them. You don't know what you saw. They're just two people in a hard place. We know, Sadie snapped. We know what a man looks like when he's being paid. Josephine said nothing, just moved to stand near the door, her arms crossed, watching. The young sisters, Alice and Mary Beth, looked at Clara with new, frightened eyes. The cabin became a place of ice. Meals were eaten in silence. When Clara spoke, Sadie would turn her back. Hattie and May would whisper to each other, stopping when Clara looked at them. Lena just stared, her eyes filled with a bottomless, chilling hatred. Clara was an outcast. She retreated to the small, cold room that had been hers. She sat on her cot, the chill of the floor seeping into her bones. The whispers from the main room were audible. Selfish, thinks she's better, bastard girl. That word hit her like a stone. She dug in her small trunk until her fingers found it, a small, porcelain doll, its face cracked, wearing a faded blue dress. The only thing she had from her mother, a woman who had left her on Silas's doorstep when Clara was 5.
You were a mistake,
Her mother's voice echoed in her memory.
a bastard. You cost me my place. You cost me everything.
She was her mother's shame, and now she was the shame of this house. Her father had left her nothing. The man who had come for justice had taken the last thing she had, her pride, and now the women, her only community, had turned on her. She was utterly, completely alone. Eli saw the change. He saw the cold shoulders, heard the whispers. He saw Clara's retreat, the way she seemed to shrink inside herself. He found her standing by the porch, staring at the gray line of the mountains. "Clara," he said. She didn't turn. "You should go. As soon as the pass is clear, take your papers to the judge. The land is yours. Just go." "I'm not leaving you," he said. "You are," she said, her voice dead.
You are leaving me. You're just taking longer than everyone else. Clara, look at me.
He tried to touch her shoulder. She jerked away as if she'd been burned. Don't touch me. They're right. You see? They're right. I'm just the girl who sleeps with the new owner to keep her place. I'm just like my mother." "That is not what this is," he said, his voice hard. "What is it, Eli? Tell me, is it justice? Is it pity? Or was it just convenient, a warm body in a blizzard?" His face tightened. He had no answer for her. He turned, his jaw clenched, and strode to the cowshed, slamming the warped door behind him. He sat in the cold gloom, his horse his only company. He was tormented. He had come for land, a simple, righteous claim. Instead, he had walked into this nest of pain. He had taken advantage of a girl half his age, a girl who was breaking under a weight that would have crushed most men. He had made her an outcast. He was no better than Silas Croft. He was just another man taking what he wanted from a woman who had nothing left to give. Clara stayed in the house, the cold seeping into her. She listened to the women whispering. She heard Sadie's sharp, bitter laugh. She felt Lena's eyes on her back, burning with hate. The night wore on. The house grew quiet. But it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the quiet of a drawn blade. Clara couldn't breathe. She couldn't stay. She was damned if she stayed. Damned if she left. But she thought of him, alone in the shed. He was the only person on this ranch who was as broken as she was. He was the enemy. He was the cause of her shame. And he was the only one who had held her while she cried. She pulled her thickest shawl on. She took the bottle of whiskey, the one she had bandaged his hand with. She slipped out of the house. The mud was thick, sucking at her boots. The moon was a sliver, the stars sharp as glass. She pushed open the cowshed door. He was sitting on his bedroll, his back against the wall, a lantern burning low beside him. His gun was in pieces on a cloth, being cleaned. He looked up, his hand freezing on the cylinder. "I told you to go," she whispered. "You'd like that, wouldn't you?" he said, not unkindly. "One less problem to solve." She walked in and sat on a small barrel, a few feet away. She held out the bottle. "For your hand, the one I bandaged." He looked at the bottle, then at her. He nodded, taking it. He took a long drink, wincing as it burned. He offered it to her. She shook her head. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds the horse shifting in its stall and the drip, drip, drip of the thaw outside. "They hate me," she said finally. "They're scared," he said, his voice low. "Same as you, same as me." "I am not scared of them," she said. "No," he said, looking at her. "You're scared of yourself. Scared you're the person they say you are." A tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. "Maybe I am." "No," he said. He set the bottle down and moved, not sitting beside her, but kneeling in the straw in front of her. He took her hands. They were ice cold. You are the girl who buried her father alone in a storm. You're the one feeding 11 people on nothing. You're the one who dug me out of the snow, even though you hated me."
"I still hate you,"
she whispered, her voice breaking.
"I know,"
he said. He rubbed his thumbs over her chapped knuckles.
"That first time. In here, that was hate. That was anger. It was wrong. I'm sorry for it. Clara." "I am too,"
she sobbed. The tears came, hot and fast. She was so tired of being strong. He pulled her, gently, off the barrel and down into the hay with him. He didn't kiss her. He just held her, his arms wrapped tight around her as she cried. He rocked her, his face buried in her hair. "Hush," he whispered. "It's all right. I've got you. I've got you." When the sobs quieted, he tilted her face up. His eyes were not cold. They were a deep, stormy gray, and they were full of a raw tenderness that undid her.
"This,"
he whispered, his lips brushing hers.
"This isn't hate."
He kissed her, and this time, it was slow. It was a promise. It was an apology. It was the search for a new beginning in the ruins of the old. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to cup his jaw. They made love on his bedroll. It was not the frantic, brutal coupling of before. It was slow, deliberate, a discovery. He unwrapped her from her layers of clothes, his hands gentle, his mouth worshipping her skin. He murmured her name. She wept, quiet tears of release, of fear, of a new, terrifying hope. He held her, kissed her tears, and brought her a peace she had never known. When they lay tangled together, breathless in the cold air,
she whispered, "What now, Eli?"
"Now," he said, pulling the blanket over them. "We survive. Together." The next morning, the sun rose into a world of mud. A man was riding toward the house. He was not from the blizzard. He was not a cowboy. He was a small, pinched man in a dark town coat, his face mean. He rode a tired-looking sorrel and had a rifle in his scabbard. Eli and Clara were on the porch. The other women were just stirring inside. Eli stepped slightly in front of Clara. The man reined in, his eyes darting over the property, over the women who now filtered out onto the porch, drawn by the new arrival. "This the Croft place?" he demanded. "It was," Eli said. "Who are you?" "Name's Pickering. Silas Croft owed me money. A lot of money. $300 from a card game in Helena. I heard he was dead. I've come to collect."
"There's nothing to collect,"
Clara said, her voice hard.
"The ranch is in debt. There is no money."
Pickering's eyes slid over her, then to Sadie, then to the younger sisters, Alice and Mary Beth. A slick, unpleasant smile spread across his face. "Oh, I see assets. I see livestock, a house, and other things. I'll take the 2 horses, and for the rest, well, I'm sure we can come to an arrangement for compensation." "You're not taking anything," Eli said. His voice was flat, but it had the deadly quiet of a drawn trigger. "This land is not yours to pick over, and these women are not for sale. You need to ride on."
"And who are you?"
Pickering sneered, his hand dropping to the pistol on his hip. "The new man in charge? You betting the whole flock?" Eli didn't go for his gun. He moved faster than Clara thought possible. He crossed the 3 feet between them and hit Pickering in the jaw. It was the sound of an axe splitting wood. Pickering flew backward off his horse, landing hard in the mud. He came up, sputtering, but he was fast. He pulled a long skinning knife from his boot and lunged, roaring. Eli sidestepped the first wild slash. He tried to grab the man's wrist, but Pickering was slippery. The man jabbed again. Eli twisted, but the blade caught him. It tore a long, deep gash across his left forearm, from elbow to wrist. Eli grunted in pain but didn't back down. He brought his right boot up, hard, into Pickering's stomach. The man gagged and fell, the knife flying from his hand. In one smooth motion, Eli drew his own pistol and leveled it at Pickering's head.
"Get on your horse!"
He panted, his voice a low growl. "You ride out now, or I swear to God, you will not leave this valley." Pickering scrambled in the mud, his eyes wide with terror. He grabbed his horse's reins, hauled himself into the saddle, and spurred the animal, galloping away, shouting curses back at them. Eli stood there, the pistol raised, until the man was a speck. Then the gun wavered. He looked down at his arm. Blood was pumping from the wound, a bright, terrible red, staining his sleeve and dripping into the mud.
"Eli!"
Clara screamed. He swayed, his face ashen. He collapsed onto the porch steps. They swarmed him. Josephine and Clara dragged him inside, back to the hearth. The floor was slick with his blood in seconds.
"Rags! Clean ones! The whiskey!"
Clara shouted, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unbutton his ruined shirt. The cut was deep, gaping, down to the bone in one place. "We have to stitch it," Elspeth said, her voice grim. "It won't close." Clara grabbed the sewing needle and the thin gut thread Elspeth used for mending. She poured whiskey over the needle, over her own hands, and then, her stomach heaving, she poured it into the wound. Eli roared, a deep, animal sound, arching off the floor. Josephine and Hattie held him down.
"I can't,"
Clara sobbed, the needle shaking in her hand.
"You must,"
Eli bit out, his face pale and slick with sweat.
"Do it, Clara, now."
She took a breath. She pushed the needle into his skin. He stiffened, a low groan in his chest, but he didn't move. She stitched, her hands covered in his blood, her tears blurring her vision. She pulled the thread tight, stitch after painful stitch, binding his flesh back together. She was crying, not for him but for herself. She was crying at the thought of him dying, at the thought of this man, who had come for revenge and had, instead, bled for them. The thought of losing him was a physical, tearing pain.
"Don't you die,"
she whispered, her voice fierce, as she tied the last knot.
"You are not allowed to die. I won't let you."
The house was silent. The fight, the blood, had broken the fever of the mutiny. He had defended them, all of them. Later that night, Eli lay by the fire, sleeping a restless, fevered sleep. Clara sat beside him, wiping his face with a cool, damp rag. The other women were on their cots, quiet. Lena got up. She walked over, not to Eli, but to Clara. She was holding a tin cup of water. She didn't say a word. Her face was pale, her eyes red. She looked at the sleeping man, his arm heavily bandaged, and then back at Clara. She held out the cup. Clara looked at her, then at the water. She took it. Lena nodded, just once, and walked back to her bed. It was not forgiveness, but it was an understanding. The war inside the house was over. A greater one, outside, had just begun. The fever broke on the third day. Eli woke with a clarity in his eyes that had been missing, the inflammation and pain replaced by a vast, bone-deep weariness. Clara had sat with him, changing the bandages, forcing broth and water past his lips. The other women kept their distance, performing their tasks with a new, quiet efficiency. The blood on the floorboards had been scrubbed away, but the memory of the fight, and of his defense, hung in the air. That night, the house was still. The wind had returned, a low, mournful sound that rattled the chimney stones. The others were asleep, a collection of huddled shapes in the faint firelight. Clara was checking the bandage on his arm one last time. The stitches she had made were crude, angry-looking, but they were holding. The skin was cool to the touch. "You'll keep the arm," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You've got a steady hand, Clara," he said, his voice rough. He was sitting propped against the hearth, his blankets pooled around his waist. She finished tying the knot and began to gather the rags. "Don't go," he said. She paused, her back to him. "You saved my life," he said, "after I came to take everything from you. You stitched me up. You deserve to know who you saved." Clara turned slowly and sat on the floor, a few feet from him. She hugged her knees to her chest, waiting. The firelight threw long, dancing shadows across his face. "My name is Eli Sampson," he began, his gaze fixed on the flames. "That much is true. And my uncle lost this land to your father. That's true, too. My uncle, he was a weak man, a dreamer. When he lost this place, he lost his mind. He put a bottle to his mouth and didn't stop until he was in the ground." Clara said nothing, just watched him. But it wasn't just him. Eli continued. "He had a daughter, my cousin, Mary. She was soft, not made for this country. After her father died, she was left with his debts, the men who'd followed him, railroad surveyors and speculators. They came to collect. She was 17, the same age as you." He paused, and his good hand clenched into a fist. "They took the last of the livestock. Then they stayed, 3 of them, for a week. When they rode out, she was broken. She walked into the Musselshell River and let it take her." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "I was riding with a trail drive in Texas when I got the letter," Eli said, his voice flat. All emotion burned out of it. "I came back. There was no law. The sheriff said it was a tragedy, but the men were gone. And she was a woman alone. There was nothing to be done." He looked at Clara then, his gray eyes like chips of ice. "So I did something. I hunted them. It took me 6 months. I found the first one in a saloon in Denver, the second in a mining camp in the Colorados. The third, I found him in Utah." "You killed them," she whispered. It was not a question. "I did," he said. "But the debt wasn't paid, the anger. It was still there. It needed a place to go. I needed money to hire men to find them. I fell in with a bad outfit, men who rode the outlaw trail. We robbed a bank. We stopped a stagecoach. We did what we had to do. I got my money. I paid my debt in blood." He let out a long breath. "I came here, Clara, not for justice. I came here for vengeance. I wanted to tear down the last thing Silas Croft built, the last monument to the lie that destroyed my family. I was going to sell this land, burn this house, and never look back. I am not a good man. I'm a thief, and I'm a killer." He had finished. The confession lay between them in the shadows. He looked beaten, exposed, waiting for the judgment he deserved. Clara was quiet for a long time, listening to the wind howl. She thought of her father's lies. She thought of Sadie's past, and Josephine's bruises, and Lena's terror. This world was built on men who took, and women who paid. She looked at him, at the raw wound on his arm, the scar on his jaw, the deep lines of grief around his eyes. "You're right," she said, her voice soft. "You're not a good man." He flinched, as if she had struck him. "Neither am I," she continued, moving closer. "Good people don't survive here. Eli, they don't bury their fathers in the mud and steal grain from their dead neighbors. Good people they don't do what we did in the shed." She sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "I don't care about the men you killed. They deserved it. I don't care about the bank. I care that you bled for us. You bled for me." He looked at her, his expression uncomprehending. He had offered her his worst self, and she had not turned away. "You're not Silas," she said. All he ever did was take. You came to take, but you stayed. You stayed and you protected us." He reached out, his bandaged arm brushing her side, and pulled her closer. She went without resistance, sinking against his good side, laying her head on his shoulder. He wrapped his right arm around her, holding her tight, as if she were the only thing keeping him from falling apart.
I don't know how to be anything else. Clara, he whispered into her hair. Then we'll learn together, she said. Later, he followed her to her small, cold room. The wind shrieked, pressing against the thin glass of the window. There was no argument, no hesitation. It was a choice. She closed the door, shutting out the world, shutting out the 10 other women, shutting out the past. He undressed her slowly, his good hand tracing the line of her shoulder, his lips following. She unbuttoned his shirt, careful of his arm, careful of the wound she herself had stitched. This time, there was no shame. There was no anger. When they came together on her narrow cot, the straw mattress rustling beneath them, it was a desperate, quiet claiming. It was a search for solace in a world that offered none. His mouth was on her throat. Her hands were in his hair, and the howl of the wind was the only sound. They moved against each other, a slow, deep rhythm that was not about passion, but about peace. It was a way to forget the blood, the snow, and the graves. It was a brief, profound, and necessary silence. The thaw came in earnest. The world turned to a sea of mud, but with it came the promise of survival. The ranch, which had been a prison, became a project. The energy shifted. It was Eli, his arm in a sling, who directed them. He was not a natural leader, but he was a natural worker, and the women, desperate for direction, followed. "The roof," he said, pointing up at the sagging timbers. "It won't survive another heavy snow. Josephine, Hattie, we need to brace it." They became a single unit. Josephine, with her broad-shouldered strength, and Eli, with his knowledge. Climbed onto the roof, they reset the shingles. Using old nails they'd scavenged from the collapsed barn. Sadie and Elspeth took charge of the food. They were ruthless, inventorying every last bean, every sprouting potato. "We've got maybe 3 weeks, Elspeth declared, "if we eat once a day. Then we need more." Clara said. Eli looked at the ground, a patch of dark earth where the snow had melted first. "The vegetable garden, your father's, it's south-facing. We plow it." "With what?" Sadie scoffed. "Those 2 skeletons you call horses?" "With my roan," Eli said. He found the old single-blade plow in the collapsed barn. It was rusted, but the steel was good. He spent a day oiling it, sharpening the blade. They hitched his strong horse to the plow. Clara took the handles. She was not strong enough. The blade skipped over the hard, half-frozen ground. "Let me," Josephine said, pushing her aside. She took the handles, her muscles straining, and roared at the horse. The blade bit deep. For a week, they worked. They were a strange, ragged army. They cleared the field, they broke the earth. The sisters, Alice and Mary Beth, were tasked with digging through the remaining snow for turnips from the root cellar, which had partially collapsed. They salvaged a bushel of half-frozen, woody turnips. "We plant these," Clara said. "The ones that are still hard. We cut them up. We plant the eyes, like potatoes." It was a desperate gamble, but it was a plan. They built a community out of shared misery. They ate their one meal of the day together, a thin, watery stew. They stopped whispering about each other and started talking about the work. Lena, her hatred for Clara cooled by the sight of Eli's blood, became Clara's shadow. She helped her, wordlessly at first, carrying water, sorting the seed. One day, they were washing the mud from the salvaged turnips at the pump. "I'm sorry," Lena whispered, her eyes on the bucket. "For what I said, what I thought." Clara stopped. She looked at the pale girl. "We were all scared. Lena." "I was stupid," Lena said, a single tear running down her cheek. I thought he could save me, but I see now. He's not here to save any one of us. He's just trying to save himself." "No," Clara said, putting a wet, cold hand on Lena's arm. "He's trying to save all of us." That night, the air was sharp and clean. The mud had begun to freeze again.
But the sky was a deep, endless black, punched through with a million stars. The work was done for the day. Clara was on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, aching in every muscle, but breathing. For the first time, she was breathing. Eli came out and stood beside her. He was quiet for a long time.
"I've never seen so many,"
she said, looking up.
"The stars."
"It's the cold," he said. "Makes the air clear." He shifted, turning to her. He seemed awkward, his weight shifting from one foot to the other.
"Clara,
"What is it?" He reached into his pocket, his good hand fumbling. He pulled out a small, dark object. It was a ring. It was not fine. It was old silver, tarnished, with a simple, hammered band.
"This was my grandmother's,"
he said, his voice low. "She crossed the plains wearing it. It's all I have left of that time, of the Sampsons." He went down on one knee. He did it stiffly, his body sore from the work, his bad arm held against his chest. He held the ring up to her. "I don't have anything," he said. "This land is in debt. I'm a wanted man, for all I know. I have nothing to offer you but hard work, a roof that leaks, and my name." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it would break her ribs. "I am not a good man," he said, his voice raw. "But I think I could be. With you. Marry me. Clara, be my wife." She looked at his face, so earnest, so broken, lit by the cold starlight. She looked at the simple, worn ring. She didn't have a word. Her throat was too tight. She knelt in the mud in front of him. She took his face in her hands, her thumbs tracing the scar on his jaw, and she kissed him. It was not a kiss of peace. It was a kiss of fierce, absolute possession. It was long and deep, and it tasted of cold air and a desperate, binding promise. She poured all the words she couldn't say into it. "Yes, always, I am yours." He dropped the ring and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. Right there on the frozen porch, she picked up the ring, her fingers shaking, and slid it onto her own finger. It was too big, but it was warm. They stayed like that, holding each other, until the cold drove them inside. A few days later, the air was warmer. They were sitting by the fire. The mood was light. Sadie was telling a sharp, funny story about a man in Cheyenne, and even Elspeth was smiling. Clara looked at Eli. He was watching the fire, the silver ring glinting on her hand as she repaired his torn shirt. She got up and crossed to him. She sat on the floor, leaning her head against his knee.
"Eli,"
she said quietly. The room went silent. "What is it?"
"The land," she said. "The claim. I'm dropping it. I won't fight you. You don't need to see the judge. It's yours. It's what you came for. It's
my wedding gift to you." He stopped toying with the fire poker. He looked down at her. His expression was not the one she expected. It wasn't relief. It wasn't victory. He shook his head. "No." "No?" she asked, confused. "I came for the land," he said, his voice low enough for only her, but firm enough for the whole room. "That's true. I came to take back what was stolen, but I'm not that man anymore." He reached down and touched her hair. "I don't want the land, Clara. But your uncle." "My uncle is dead. My sister is dead. Revenge won't bring them back. This ranch, it's not a prize to be won. It's just dirt. It's just a broken-down house." He took her hand, the one wearing his ring. "It's nothing without you."
"I don't understand,"
she whispered. "We own this together," he said, his voice clear and final. "Or no one does. We file a new claim, as husband and wife, as Samson, or we burn it to the ground and walk away. But I am not taking it from you. Not now. Not ever." She looked around the room, at the 10 women watching them, their faces illuminated by the fire. She looked at Lena, who was smiling, a real, gentle smile. She looked at Josephine, who nodded once, a gesture of deep respect. She turned back to Eli and kissed his hand.
Together,
she agreed. For 2 weeks, there was a fragile peace. The snow receded to the tops of the mountains. The mud began to dry. The tiny green shoots of the turnips pushed their way up through the cold earth. They had plowed, and they had planted. They had mended the roof. They were a family, forged in snow and blood. Clara and Eli were married by Elspeth, who had read from a Bible she'd kept in her trunk. They were all there, in the main room, witnesses to the simple, quiet act. That afternoon, Clara stood on the porch, watching the sun set, a pale, watery yellow. Eli came and stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. She leaned into his warmth, her hand resting over his, the silver ring cold on her finger. It was quiet. It was safe. But the winter, though it was taming, was not over. And the past, Eli's past, was still out there. It was riding, somewhere on the thawed roads, and it was coming for him. The peace lasted 6 days. 6 days of hard work, shared meals, and the fragile, quiet hope of a future. The first true green of spring was pushing through the mud. The air was soft. It was on the 7th day, a Tuesday, that the past rode in. He was a big man, broad in the shoulders, with a gut that pushed against his stained vest. He wore a tin star pinned to the vest, and he rode a horse that looked as mean and tired as he did. He wasn't alone. A younger, wiry deputy rode beside him. They didn't stop at the fence line. They rode straight into the yard, their horses churning the drying mud. Eli was on the porch, showing Josephine how to properly resole a boot. Clara was just coming from the house, a bucket of water in her hand. All 10 women, scattered around the yard, froze. The man with the star stopped his horse 10 feet from the porch. He had a thick graying mustache and small, piggish eyes that took in the scene. He looked at Eli, and a slow, ugly smile of recognition spread across his face. "Well, I'll be," the man boomed, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Eli Sampson, I heard a rumor you was up this way, but I didn't believe it. Thought you'd be in Mexico by now. Or hell." Eli slowly stood up. He didn't reach for his gun. He just set the boot down. "Sheriff Brody, it's been a long time." "Not long enough," Brody said. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. "I've been looking for you for 3 years. Sampson, ever since you and that bastard gang of yours made a fool of me outside Cheyenne." Clara's blood ran cold. This was it, the past he had confessed. "What do you want, Brody?" Eli asked, his voice calm, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Want?" Brody laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "I got what I want. I got a piece of paper here." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded, sweat-stained warrant. "Says you're wanted, Sampson, for the robbery of the First National Bank in Laramie, and for the murder of one Jebediah Stryker, a bank teller. Got shot in the back. That's a hanging offense." "I didn't kill any teller," Eli said, his voice hard. "That was Pike. I told you that." "Don't matter to me who pulled the trigger." Brody sneered. "You was there. You rode with him. The judge says you all hang. I'm here to take you in."
"No," Clara whispered, dropping the bucket. Water splashed over her boots. "No, you can't."
Sheriff Brody's eyes slid to Clara. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. He noted the ring on her finger. "Well, now, looks like you found yourself a little homestead, a wife, and a whole family." His eyes swept over the 10 other women, who had drawn into a tight, silent knot near the house. "This your new gang, Sampson? A bit prettier than the last one." "They've got nothing to do with this," Eli said, taking a step forward. "This is between you and me." "That's where you're wrong," Brody said, his hand dropping to rest on the butt of his pistol. "See, I remember you. You're the one who shot my horse out from under me, laughed while I lay in the dirt. You and your friends made me walk 10 miles back to town. Humiliated me. His face darkened. I'm taking you in. And if this little wife of yours, or any of these other strays, gives me 1 ounce of trouble, my deputy here is authorized to use force." The deputy, a young man with a nervous twitch, unholstered his pistol and held it loosely.
"You can't!"
Clara cried, running forward. She stood in front of Eli, her arms spread wide.
"He's a good man. He didn't do it. He's my husband."
"Clara, no," Eli said, trying to push her behind him. "Get out of the way, girl," Brody growled. "This ain't your business."
"Please,"
Clara begged, tears welling in her eyes. She looked at the sheriff, forcing every ounce of desperation she had into her voice.
"Please, Sheriff, he saved us. We were starving. This ranch, it was nothing. He helped us. He protected us from a man who tried to hurt us. He's not the man you think he is."
"He's a murderer," Brody said flatly. "And I'm taking him now. Stand aside, or I'll have my deputy drag you aside." "No." "Clara, stop," Eli said. His voice was firm. He put his hands on her shoulders and gently but irresistibly moved her behind him. He looked at Brody. His face was a mask of defeat, but his eyes were clear. "All right, Brody." Eli said, "I'll go. No trouble. You have my word. Just leave them alone. They're not part of this. They're just women trying to survive. Let them be." Brody's smile returned. This was the victory he wanted. Not just the arrest, but the surrender, the humiliation. "That's smart. Samson, real smart." He nodded to his deputy. "Cuff him." The deputy dismounted, his gun still in his hand, and pulled a set of iron cuffs from his belt. "Hands behind your back, Samson." Eli looked at Clara. His eyes were full of a pain that was deeper than any bullet wound. He was apologizing. He was saying goodbye. He turned and put his hands behind his back. The deputy snapped the cuffs on, tight. "Where are you taking him?" Clara asked, her voice shaking. "Town. He'll sit in my jail till the circuit judge gets here in a week. Then we'll have a trial. And then we'll have a hanging. Real proper." Brody looked around the yard. "Don't have a cell here, I suppose. We'll use that cowshed. It's solid enough. We'll stay the night, ride out at dawn. It's a long way, and I don't want to be on the road after dark." The deputy shoved Eli toward the cowshed. "Move!" Eli walked, his back straight, his head held high. He didn't look back. Clara watched until the shed door closed. Brody looped a thick chain through the door handle and a new iron loop he spiked into the door frame, locking it with a heavy padlock. "My deputy will stand first watch," Brody announced to the yard. "I'll be in the house. I expect supper." He hitched his gun belt and stomped up the porch steps. "And I'll take the main room, by the fire." He walked into the house as if he owned it, leaving a stunned, terrified silence in his wake. The 10 women looked at Clara. Their protector was in chains. The new owner was a fat, cruel man with a tin star. The peace was over. The night was the longest of Clara's life. Brody sat at their table, eating their stew, his rifle on his knees. He was loud, boastful, telling stories of outlaws he'd captured, his eyes lingering on Sadie and the younger sisters. The women were stone. They moved around him, serving him, their faces pale and set. Clara's mind was racing. A week, a trial, a hanging. The words echoed. The deputy sat on the porch, a dark shape against the faint moonlight, his rifle across his lap, watching the cowshed. At 10 o'clock, Brody grunted. "I'm turning in you," he pointed at Elspeth. "More blankets. And you." He pointed at Sadie. "More coffee. The rest of you, get to your beds. I want no one up, no one out. You hear me?" They scattered. Clara went to her small room, but she did not get on the cot. She sat in the dark, her hands clenched, the silver ring on her finger a cold, heavy weight. She thought of his confession,
I'm a thief, and I'm a killer. She thought of him bleeding on the floor for them. She thought of his kiss in the starlight. Marry me, Clara. She would not let him hang. She waited. 1 hour. 2. The house was filled with the sound of Brody's heavy, wet snores. She heard the deputy on the porch, his boots scraping as he shifted position. She rose, silent as a shadow. She slipped out of her room. In the main room, Brody's gun belt was hanging on the back of his chair, not 3 feet from his sleeping head. His pistol was in the holster. Her heart hammered. She couldn't. She went to the kitchen. She found the bottle of whiskey, the one they'd used for Eli's arm. It was half full. She took it. She also took a tin cup. She went to the back door, the one in the lean-to kitchen. It creaked. She froze. Brody snorted in his sleep, rolled over, and was still. She slipped outside. The air was cold, damp. She circled the house, staying deep in the shadows, her bare feet making no sound on the damp earth. The deputy was a silhouette on the porch steps. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice nervous, bringing his rifle up. Clara stepped into the moonlight. She was holding the whiskey bottle and the cup. "It's just me," she said, her voice trembling. "Just enough. Clara, Mrs. Sampson." The deputy relaxed. Slightly. "You're supposed to be in bed." "I know. I couldn't sleep. It's so cold." She held up the bottle. I thought you might want something to warm you. For your watch." The young man looked at the bottle. He looked at her. She was young, pretty, her hair down, her nightgown visible beneath her shawl. He licked his lips. "Sheriff said no one." "He's asleep," Clara whispered, stepping closer. "He won't know. It's a cold night to be standing guard. You're just doing your job. You deserve it." She poured a heavy measure into the cup and held it out. "Please, it's the only thanks I can give. For not being cruel." He hesitated. Then he set his rifle down, leaning it against the porch rail. He took the cup. "Well, I suppose one won't hurt. Mighty kind of you, ma'am." He drank it down, fast. That's strong stuff." "Have another?" she said, pouring. "To the bottom of the bottle. It's just taking up space." She stayed with him, talking, her voice low and soothing. She asked him where he was from, if he had family. She kept his cup full. He drank it all. He was young and lonely, and he was trying to impress her. After 20 minutes, his words began to slur. His eyes grew heavy. I should walk the perimeter," he mumbled, trying to stand. "You should rest your eyes," she cooed. "Just for a minute. I'll sit here. I'll watch the shed. I promise. I'll wake you if anything happens." He sat back down, heavily. Just a minute." His head lolled. 5 minutes later, he was snoring, his mouth open. Clara took a breath. She picked up his rifle. She checked it, loaded. She took the keys to the padlock from his belt. She took his pistol, too. She ran, silent, to the cowshed. Her hands were shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to get the key into the lock. The chain rattled. The heavy lock sprang open. She pulled the door open. It was pitch black inside. "Eli?" she whispered. "Clara?" His voice, from the darkness. "What are you doing? Get out of here!" She fumbled, found his arm. "I'm getting you out." She found the cuffs, the key. The lock on the cuffs was different. The deputy's keys didn't fit. "Damn it," she hissed. "The keys don't fit." "Brody," he said. "He has the cuff key." "I can't," she said, despair rising. "I can't go near him." "It's all right," he said. "Get out of here before he wakes up." "No," she said. She dropped to her knees on the cold, packed earth floor. "I am not leaving you. Not tonight. Clara, you'll be an accomplice. He'll arrest you, too." "I don't care," she said, her voice fierce. She pressed her face against his chest,
her arms wrapping around his waist.
I don't care. If this is the last night, I'm spending it here with you.
He couldn't hold her. His hands were bound behind him, but he leaned his body into hers. You are a fool, Clara Sampson.
I'm your fool,
she whispered. She kissed him, her mouth finding his in the dark. It was a desperate, frantic kiss. He angled his head, taking her, his lips hard, his teeth grazing hers.
I can't,
he groaned, his body tensing as she pressed against him.
I can,
she whispered. She didn't take off her nightgown. She didn't take off his shirt. She just hiked her gown up, fumbled with the buttons of his trousers, and guided him to her. She straddled him, there on the cold, dark, manure-dusted floor. It was not gentle. It was a claiming. It was a promise. It was an act of defiance against the dawn, against the rope, against the law. It was two people, in the last moments of their world, forging themselves into one. She rode him, her head thrown back, silent tears streaming down her face. He moved beneath her, his body straining, his hands cuffed and useless behind him. It was a fast, rough, and heartbreaking coupling. When it was over, she collapsed against him, her body shaking with sobs. He couldn't wipe her tears. He just buried his face in her hair.
I love you,
she whispered, the words torn from her.
I love you, Eli. I love you,
he answered, his voice thick. Now, for God's sake, go, before they find you. She kissed him one last time, hard. She pulled herself together. I'll be back, she said.
Clara, no, don't do this.
I'll be back, she repeated. She slipped out of the shed, rechained the door, and locked the padlock. She ran back to the porch. The deputy was still asleep. She put the rifle, the pistol, and the keys back, exactly as they had been. She dropped the empty whiskey bottle in the mud. She fled back to her room. She didn't sleep. She waited for the sun. Dawn came, gray and cold. Wake up, you drunk fool! Sheriff Brody's roar shook the house. Clara heard him kick the deputy's chair. Get up! We're riding! Clara came out onto the porch. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. All the other women were there, 10 of them. They stood in a line, just off the porch, between the house and the cowshed. Elspeth held her cast-iron skillet. Sadie and Hattie held pitchforks. Josephine held the wood-splitting axe. Alice and Mary Beth held rocks. Ruth, the twitchy one, held the skinning knife she'd pocketed. May had a length of heavy chain, and Lena, pale and trembling, held her father's old, heavy horse pistol. What in God's name is this? Brody snarled, his hand on his gun. You are not taking him, Clara said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the morning air. She was holding the deputy's rifle. Clara, no! Eli's voice roared from inside the shed. You put the gun down, girl, Brody said, his eyes narrowing. He drew his pistol. I'll shoot you. I swear to God, I'll shoot you right here. Then you'll have to, Clara said, raising the rifle to her shoulder. It was heavy, but her aim was steady. But you won't leave this yard alive. You're all insane, Brody yelled. He turned to his deputy, who was scrambling to his feet, hungover and terrified. Boy, draw your weapon. We've got an insurrection. The deputy fumbled for his pistol. Now, Josephine! Clara screamed. Josephine let out a roar and charged. Not at Brody, but at the deputy. She swung the heavy axe. The deputy yelped and fired his pistol. The shot went wide, hitting the dirt. Josephine didn't stop. She swung the flat of the axe, not the blade, against the side of the deputy's head. He went down like a sack of grain, unconscious. Brody fired. The shot was deafening. The bullet kicked up splinters from the porch rail, inches from Clara's face. Sadie and Hattie charged, screaming, their pitchforks raised. Brody turned, fired again. Sadie cried out, stumbling, clutching her leg as blood blossomed on her skirt. "Stop!" Eli bellowed from the shed. Brody leveled his pistol at the fallen Sadie. "To finish her." "You all die!" he screamed. "No," Clara said. She fired the rifle. The kick nearly broke her shoulder. The shot was true. It hit Brody in his right shoulder, spinning him around. His pistol flew from his numb hand. He howled, a high, thin sound of pain and rage, clutching his ruined arm. In the ringing silence, Ruth was at his back, the skinning knife at his throat. "Move and you're dead," she hissed. "Get the key," Clara ordered, her voice shaking, but her eyes hard. She kept the rifle trained on Brody's chest. Lena ran forward, her hands shaking, and fumbled in Brody's pockets. She found the key. She ran to the shed, unlocked the chain, and pulled the door open. Eli stumbled out, his hands still cuffed behind him. Lena put the key in the cuffs. They sprang open. Eli rubbed his raw wrists. He looked at the scene. The deputy, unconscious, Sadie, bleeding in the mud, Hattie and May trying to stop the flow, Brody on his knees, Ruth's knife at his throat, and Clara standing on the porch, rifle in hand, her face a mask of terrible, beautiful fury. He walked to Brody. He didn't say a word. He just backhanded him, hard, across the face. Brody slumped to the ground. "We have to go," Eli said, his voice urgent. He scooped up Brody's pistol. "Now. He'll have a posse here by nightfall. Elspeth, can she ride?"
"The leg is bad,"
Elspeth said, ripping a strip from her apron.
"It's through the calf, but it's bleeding hard."
"She rides," Eli said. "Everyone, grab your coats. Grab any food we have left, whatever you can carry in 2 minutes." The women scattered. Eli looked at Clara. He walked up the steps and took the rifle from her trembling hands. "You did it," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "We did it," she corrected, her body starting to shake. "We have to go," he said. He grabbed her hand. "Josephine, Ruth, tie them, the sheriff and the deputy. Tie them well. Take their boots." Josephine and Ruth nodded, dragging the 2 men, one bleeding, one unconscious, toward the porch rail. 10 minutes later, the ranch was empty. They took the 2 ranch horses and Eli's roan. Sadie was tied onto one, slumped over, with Mary Beth holding her. Eli and Clara rode the roan. The other 8 women walked, half running, carrying sacks of flour, salt pork, and blankets. They didn't look back. They headed straight for the deep timber of the mountains, away from the roads, away from the law. They ran, a desperate, ragged group, into the deep woods. They ran until the sun was high. They ran until Sadie was pale from blood loss and the women were crying from exhaustion. They found it by accident, a small, ancient hunting cabin, nestled in a draw, invisible from 50 yards away. The roof was moss-covered, one wall half collapsed. But it was shelter. Eli pushed the rotted door open. It smelled of damp earth and animal dens. "Here," he panted, sliding off the horse. He lifted Clara down, then went and untied Sadie, carrying her inside. "We stop here." He laid Sadie on the floor. "Clara, Elspeth, see to her. The rest of you, bar the door. Block the windows. We're not safe, not yet." Clara knelt by Sadie, her hands covered in the other woman's blood. She looked up at Eli, who stood in the doorway, the rifle in his hand, his eyes scanning the forest. He was a killer. He was a thief. He was her husband. And she, Clara Sampson, who had buried her father in a storm, had just shot a sheriff and led 10 women into the wilderness. She was an outlaw. They all were. Spring came to the high mountains not as a gentle relief, but as a violent, messy thaw. The world, frozen for months, dissolved into a torrent of mud, roaring water, and falling rock. For weeks, they had run, moving from one cold, damp shelter to the next, always pushing deeper into the wilderness. The posse, Eli was certain, had not given up. They had seen smoke in the valleys below, twice. They were a ragged, starving band of ghosts. Sadie's leg, which Elspeth and Clara had cleaned with the last of the whiskey and stitched shut, had festered. She had burned with fever, and they had carried her on a litter made of blankets and pine boughs. Her breathing shallow, her face a pale, waxy gray. They had all but given her up for dead. But Sadie, like the tough, stubborn sagebrush, clung to life. One morning, she woke, her fever broken, and asked for water. The crisis had passed. They were 11 souls, battered and broken, but alive. It was Eli who found the place. He had been scouting, as he always did, moving like a shadow through the timber. He was gone for a full day. When he returned, his face was not set in its usual grim, hunted lines. It was calm. "I found it," he said, his voice low. He led them on a brutal 2-day climb, up a narrow game trail that seemed to vanish into a solid wall of granite, but behind a screen of ancient, thick-trunked firs. The rock opened. It was a valley, a deep, hidden bowl in the mountains, perhaps no more than a few hundred acres, invisible from below and shielded from the high passes. A fast, clear stream cut through its center, and the valley floor was flat and rich with black earth. "No one comes here," he said. "The tribes might have once, but not settlers. It's too high, too hidden." They stopped running. Their first home was the shallow, dry cave Eli had found. Tucked under an overhang of rock, it was shelter. For the first time in months, they slept without fear of a boot kicking the door in. But it was not a life. It was just a place to hide. The reality of their new existence set in. They were outlaws. They were nameless. They had no money, no law, no world to return to. They had only themselves. Eli Sampson, the outlaw, died in that valley. It was Clara who buried him. She had been standing by the stream, watching the water, when he came to stand beside her. "Brody will be looking for Eli Sampson," he said, his voice quiet. "He'll look for a man with a scarred arm and a wife named Clara. He'll look for 10 women." "What are we to do?" she whispered. "Eli Sampson is gone," he said. He looked at her, his gray eyes clear. "He died in that jail, or he died in the woods. I don't know which, but he's gone. I need a new name." She looked at him, at this man who was her husband, her savior, her fellow criminal. He was strong. He was quiet. He was a builder. "Amos," she said, the name coming to her from some old Sunday school lesson. Amos, a simple name. He nodded, a slow, final gesture. "Amos," he repeated. It fit. "And you're my wife, Clara, just Clara." Life, separate from the world, began. It was a brutal, primitive existence. Amos and Josephine, a silent, powerful team, became the muscle. They had one good axe, the one Josephine had carried, and the 2 heads Amos had traded the roan for. They felled trees. They cleared a small, hidden patch of land near the stream, shielded by aspens. They broke the hard, rocky soil with sharpened sticks in their bare hands. The other women, who had been victims and followers, found their purpose. Elspeth became the matron, rationing their pitiful supplies of flour and salt. Lena, her own ghosts quieted by the hard, simple work, became a forager. She had a gift for it, finding the edible mushrooms, the wild onions, the bitter roots that Elspeth boiled into a thick, nourishing stew. Ruth, the twitchy, silent one, became their hunter. She did not use a rifle. The sound was too great a risk. She used the snares Amos taught her to build, and she was mercilessly good at it, bringing in rabbits and grouse. Sadie, recovering, her limp a permanent, painful reminder of their flight, took charge of mending. She sat by the fire, her hands, once soft, now calloused, stitching their rags back together with sinew thread. They planted their small, desperate crop, the potatoes and turnips they had carried in their sacks. They fished the stream with lines woven from horsehair. They were a community of the forgotten. 2 months into this new life, Clara knew. The sickness came every morning, a racking nausea that left her weak and trembling. She hid it, slipping away from the cave to be sick by the stream, blaming it on the bitter roots or the gamey taste of the rabbit. But Elspeth knew. The older woman watched her, her eyes missing nothing. One day, she followed Clara. She waited, saying nothing, until Clara had finished, wiping her mouth with a cold, wet hand. "You are with child," Elspeth said. It was not a question. Clara froze, her hand still at her mouth. She looked at Elspeth, her eyes wide with a new, terrifying panic. "A baby, here, in this wilderness, another mouth to feed, a child to be born in a cave, hunted with no future." I think so," Clara whispered, the admission tearing out of her. "I think since the night before Brody came." "A winter baby," Elspeth said, her face grim. "It will be hard. You must tell your husband." Clara was terrified. She was afraid to tell him, afraid to place this new, impossible burden on his shoulders. She waited until night, when the others were asleep in the cave, their bodies huddled together for warmth. She and Amos lay apart, near the mouth of the cave, a habit of guarding. She touched his arm in the dark. "Amos, what is it?" he whispered, instantly awake. "You hear something?" "No," she said, her voice shaking. I'm pregnant." The silence stretched. The only sound was the rush of the distant stream and the cry of an owl. He said nothing. He didn't move. A cold dread filled her. He was angry. He saw it as she did, a trap, a death sentence. Then, slowly, he reached for her. He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. He didn't speak. He just held her. She felt a single hot tear land in her hair. He was not angry. She did not know what. He let her go, and she lay back on her blanket. He said nothing more. But the next morning, at dawn, she woke to the sound of the axe. He had left the camp, and he was felling trees, not small ones for firewood. He was felling the largest, straightest pines he could find. His action was his answer. The news changed the camp. The child was not a burden. It was a symbol. It was a reason. It was a future they had not dared to dream of. The women, this ragged family of outcasts, formed a protective wall around her. They would not let her carry water. They would not let her dig in the field. Sadie gave her the best of the blankets. Lena would bring her the first wild raspberries, a small, precious handful. Josephine and Amos worked with a new, frantic energy. Summer was hard, but it was good. Their small crop took root. The stream was full of fish. The snares were never empty. They were thin, all of them, but they were strong, hardened by the mountain air and the constant labor. The first break came in August. The world, which they had shut out, intruded. Alice and Mary Beth, the sisters, had grown restless. They were young. They missed people, music, a life that was not just about survival. Amos had found a mining camp, a place called Last Hope, over the far ridge. It was a journey of 2 days, on foot. He had gone there, once, trading the last of his silver buttons for salt and a new knife. The sisters begged to go. "Just to see," Alice pleaded. "Just to see a town again. We can trade. Ruth has pelts." Amos was against it. It was too dangerous. But Clara argued for them. "They deserve to see a street," she said. "They are not outlaws. Not really. Let them go." They went, Alice, Mary Beth, and Ruth, the protector. They were gone for a week. When they returned, Ruth was carrying a sack of flour, but the sisters were carrying a letter. It was crumpled, stained. and months old.
It was at the post office, Mary Beth cried, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Posted for us. It's from our Aunt Clara in Ohio. She heard what our stepfather did. She sent money for the stage. She wants us to come home.
A choice, a way out. The camp was split by a terrible, beautiful sorrow. They were a family, but this was a chance at a real life.
You have to go,
Clara said, her voice thick. She held them both, her own belly swelling between them.
This is not a life for you. This is our cage. You have a home. You go to it.
Their departure was a wound. They all walked with them to the head of the valley. A silent, weeping procession. Clara gave them a small bag of salt, their most precious commodity. Elspeth gave them her warmest shawl.
Don't forget us,
Alice wept, clinging to Clara.
Never,
Clara whispered. They watched the two young girls, escorted by Ruth, walk down the mountain, back to the world. Ruth returned 3 days later, alone, her face set. The sisters were on the stagecoach, gone. Their leaving broke the seal. It made the others think. A month later, Hattie, one of the widows, made her choice.
I have a son,
she confessed, her voice thick.
In Oregon. He works for a timber company. I have to know if he's alive. I can't die here, nameless.
She left alone, in the dead of night, leaving only a note of thanks. Then May, her brother, she'd heard was in Fort Benton. She, too, slipped away. Now there were 7, Amos, Clara, and the 5 who had nowhere else to go. Elspeth, the matron, Josephine, the builder, Sadie, the survivor, Ruth, the shadow, and Lena, the healer.
This is our home,
Sadie said one night, rubbing her scarred leg by the fire.
I have no family. I have no world. I'd rather be a free woman in this valley than a cripple in a whorehouse.
Ruth nodded, sharpening her knife.
They'd hang me in Cheyenne. Here, I'm just Ruth.
They stayed. They were the ones who were truly free, because they had nothing left to lose. You need a house, Amos said to Clara. As the first chill of autumn touched the air, the aspens on the high slopes were turning a brilliant, fiery gold.
The cave won't do, not for the baby.
He had been working on it, in secret, with Josephine. Now, he showed her, in a small clearing, shielded by pines, he had laid a foundation of stone. He and Josephine began to build. It was an act of pure, agonizing devotion. They had no nails, no milled lumber. They had only their axes and their hands. They felled the trees. They hand-notched the logs, fitting them together. They built a sturdy stone fireplace, Eli setting every rock himself, his hands cracked and bleeding. The women helped. They gathered moss and mud, chinking the gaps to keep the wind out. They wove mats from river reeds for the floor. They were not building a house. They were building a fortress, a home. It was small, just one room, with a low loft for storage. But it was beautiful. It was solid. It smelled of fresh-cut pine and safety. It took them 2 months. When it was finished, the first snows were already dusting the high peaks. Amos had fashioned a crude, sturdy door from split logs and sinew hinges. He took Clara's hand and led her inside. A fire was already burning in the hearth. "It's a wedding gift," he said, his voice rough. "We are already married, Amos," she smiled, her hand on her belly. "Not like this," he said. "Not in a home I built for you, with a roof that will hold." That evening, they had their wedding. There was no preacher. There was no law. There was only their family. Their church was the grove of golden aspens, the sinking sun turning the leaves to fire. Their guests were Elspeth, Sadie, Ruth, Josephine, and Lena, their faces clean, their mended clothes their finest. Clara had woven a crown of late-blooming purple asters and bright red leaves for her hair. Amos had trimmed his beard, and he wore the clean shirt Sadie had made for him from a corner of a blanket. They stood in front of their new home. Amos took her hand. The silver ring his grandmother had worn was tight on her swollen finger. He didn't take it off. He just held her hand, his thumb stroking the worn metal. He looked at her face, fuller now, her eyes clear and strong. He looked at the women, his family, who stood watching, their expressions soft.
"Clara,"
he said, his voice thick. "My wife."
"Amos,"
she answered, her voice breaking.
"My husband."
That was all. Elspeth began to hum an old, reedy tune. Josephine, in a rare display of emotion, wiped a tear from her cheek. They had a feast. A rabbit Ruth had snared, roasted with wild onions, potatoes baked in the ashes of the new hearth, a small, precious, flat cake Lena had made from the last of the traded flour, sweetened with berry juice. They ate, and they talked, and they even laughed. Sadie told a story of a foolish man in Cheyenne, and her sharp wit, which had been buried by pain, shone through. As the stars came out, sharp and cold in the thin mountain air, the 5 women gathered their blankets. Wordlessly, they filed out of the new cabin and walked the short distance to the cave, which was now their own. They left the new house to its owners. Clara stood by the hearth. The fire was blazing, the stones radiating a deep, penetrating warmth. The cabin was quiet, filled with the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the faint, rushing sound of the stream outside. Amos barred the new, thick door, a solid, heavy sound. The world was shut out. He came and stood behind her, his arms circling her, his large, calloused hands resting on the high, firm curve of her belly. She felt the baby kick against his palm. He kissed her neck, his beard soft. She leaned her head back against his shoulder, her own hands covering his. They stood in silence for a long time, just watching the flames dance. She turned in his arms, her body heavy, to face him. She looked up at his face, at the lines of hardship, the gray in his beard, the profound, quiet love in his eyes. "You are all I have left," she whispered, the words a raw, simple truth. He bent his head, his forehead resting against hers. "You," he murmured, "are everything." He kissed her. It was not the desperate, grieving kiss from the jail cell. It was not the angry, claiming kiss from the cowshed. It was a kiss of profound, patient, and healing love. It held all the sorrow of their past and all the hope of their future. He lifted her, his arms strong despite her weight, and carried her to the simple bed he had built in the corner. It was a frame of pine, with a mattress of soft, dried grass and covered in their thickest blankets. They undressed each other slowly. In the flickering firelight, their bodies were a map of their journey. He was scarred, lean, and hard. She was full, soft, and alive with the child. They came together with a slowness that was a form underscore of worship. It was not a taking or a desperate act. It was a promise. It was a vow of survival. Every touch, every movement was a word. I am here. I am yours. We are safe. He held her, his movements deep and sure, as if he could pour all of his strength, all of his devotion, into her. She clung to him, her husband, her outlaw, her home. They found their peace not in the world, but in each other. The fall deepened. The aspens lost their gold. The first heavy snow came, blanketing their valley, sealing them in. But this year, they were ready. The cabin was warm. The small root cellar was stocked with potatoes and turnips. Smoked fish and dried venison hung from the rafters. Clara sat on the small, sturdy porch Amos had built, a thick wool blanket wrapped around her, her hands resting on her round, low belly. The baby was due soon. The air was cold and still, but the sun was bright, making the fresh snow glitter. Amos came out. He stood behind her chair, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders, his thumbs rubbing the base of her neck. He looked out at their world. Behind them, the forest was stark and quiet, the pines heavy with white. The mountains, once their pursuers, were now their protectors. It was a hard land, a forgotten land, but it was theirs. It was not the life either of them had dreamed of. It was a life forged from violence, loss, and a desperate, defiant love. It was a new beginning, born in the heart of the wild. Thank you for listening to this story. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please leave a comment below and let's connect. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West and share your thoughts on Clara and Amos's journey.